didn't do anything. Why don't you stop talking about what happened? You think I like it any better than you?
Anything the matter?
No, sir.
Better get a grip on things, Ralph. You're not doing yourself any good this way. Or the job either. If I can help you, why don't you come in the office and we'll talk about it?
Well, everything's okay, Mr. Johnson.
All right, Ralph.
Isn't this going to look good on my record?
This is Talkback. Our drama for this program is called The Secret. Our guest is Dr. Dave White, Director of Program, Division of Temperance and General Welfare, General Board of Christian Social Concerns of the Methodist Church. Later, Mr. Merrill Emery and Dr. Ross Snyder will be asking Dr. White questions raised by our play.
Get my lunchbox, will you? I better get on down to the shop. I don't want to be late this morning.
Okay, I've got it all packed. I'm so glad we got Johnny off on that early train. Here you are, Ralph. Mister. Isn't there anything else in your life except those blueprints?
Look, you put a daughter on the train for college this morning. Now, these plans are going to make sure she stays there, that I can afford it. These are going to get me that foreman's promotion.
I hear your competition has the same idea.
Well, Frank's a good man. But this idea of mine can't miss. It's going to speed up that machine of mine. It's going to double our output.
Well, what if it doesn't work?
It will. I've got it all figured out. The machine can take the strain. You see, by moving the gears, changing them a little, well, by putting one up near the drive shaft, that cutting blade's going to give us twice the action.
Gee, couldn't that be dangerous?
No, not if you know what you're doing. And I do. The new foreman has everything under control. See you tonight, sweetheart. I want to get down there and get this thing going.
Good luck, Mr. Foreman.
Johnson's going to pick his new foreman on our production records, not on who flatters him the most. Production, it counts. He'll drop dead. Don't talk so much. Just keep going. Should we slow it down a little now, Ralph?
the house so quiet. Hey, how do you think this is going to look on our college freshmen? Sweet, huh? Oh, it didn't work, did it?
What didn't?
Your idea. Didn't turn out the way you wanted?
No. No, it didn't.
Now, don't feel bad. That wasn't going to decide the promotion, was it now? But I mean, you weren't depending on just that alone. There's your whole record. That's what counts.
Edith, you don't understand. It's more than that. You see...
Wait, maybe that's Joni. Hello? Oh, yes, we'll accept the charges. It is Joni. Oh, hello. Hello, darling. How are you? How was the trip? Oh, Joni, you sound so wonderfully happy. We are so proud of you. Oh, now tell me all about everything. What's your room like?
Yes, I understand, Doctor. Well, you tell them not to worry. Well, we'll take care of everything down here. That's right. Yes, Doctor, we're fully covered for it. Uh-huh. That's right. Yes, Doctor. That's it. And thank you again. Goodbye.
How is Fred?
Had a good night. Doctor said he was lucky. He was able to save the thumb and the index finger.
Poor guy.
Let's finish this report so we can send it along to the insurance company. What was it, Ralph? The drive shaft, belt, bad bearing, or what?
Well, it's hard to say. Once the guard flew off, everything piled up.
We must have some idea. No one knows those machines any better than you do. Ralph.
Well, a piece of the sheet metal must have just worked up past the safety plate into the gears.
Well, that doesn't sound possible.
Well, the guard flew off, didn't it? That didn't sound possible either.
No one's blaming you, Ralph. The insurance company wants this report, not me. I'm sorry. Look, we're all a little upset by the accident. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Get a fresh start tomorrow, huh?
No.
Well, why not?
Well, I got a lot of work to do. I've never fallen behind before, and I'm not going to let it happen to me now. I'll stay.
Gives me the creeps working right here where it happened. Losing his fingers like that, what good's he gonna be? 2 weeks already, but I can hear him screaming like it was only a minute ago. What's the matter? Look what you made me do! Will you shut up? Hey, what? I didn't do anything. Why don't you stop talking about what happened? You think I like it any better than you?
Anything the matter?
No, sir.
Better get a grip on things, Ralph. You're not doing yourself any good this way. Or the job either. If I can help you, why don't you come in the office and we'll talk about it?
Well, everything's okay, Mr. Johnson.
All right, Ralph.
Now, isn't this going to look good on my record?
Oh, come on, Ralph, relax. You still got a good chance for that promotion. Mr. Johnson.
Fred.
Coming back to work, desk job. Wish me luck.
How you feeling, Fred?
Oh, all right. Everything considered.
Fred,
Accidents happen. This one happened to me. Oh, Ralph, I hope this doesn't ruin your chances for that promotion. I know how you were counting on it.
How about money, Fred? You need any?
Nah. Company's been wonderful. Say, look, it's just about lunchtime. I'll go along with you, and I'll bum a cup of coffee.
No. What I mean is, I don't feel so good. I may even go home. Well, what's the matter? What happened?
Oh, where have you been? Are you all right?
Well, sure.
The plant called.
The plant.
Mr. Johnson said that you'd left. Sick. Oh, he was so worried about you.
Johnson's spying on me.
Spying?
Well, what else would you call it? He could have believed me.
Well, he believed you. I told you he was worried about you. He said that you've been acting strange.
What do you mean, strange? I've been working as hard as anybody up there. I've been working harder than anybody else.
Ralph, what is wrong with you?
Nothing!
Yes, there is. Ever since Joni left, you've been wandering around as if the end of the world was coming. Oh, Ralph, if you're sick or if we can't afford the college or whatever it is.
Please, Edith, let me alone. Just let me alone.
How can I? What happens to you happens to me. All our lives, we've trusted each other. Trust me now, darling. Tell me what's the matter. Please let me help you now.
There's nothing to tell.
Yes, there is. Something has happened to you.
I'm all right.
Well, what about Joni and what about me? Are we going to be all right, too?
Please, Edith, don't ask any more questions. It's going to be all right.
All right, Ralph. Then we'll just have to trust you. We'll leave everything up to you.
I have a real compassion for this guy. Here his offspring is just going off into a new world. It's up to him as the man to make this possible and keep it possible. In true American style, he tried to invent something and by hard work make this possible, but it's kicked back and resulted in... There's blood on his hands now of his own fellow worker. He's alienated himself from his wife. He's all shut up with himself. Poor guy.
This is a very real situation, isn't he?
Yeah.
One with which we can very easily identify.
This is an example of what I guess you would call real guilt, not a neurotic guilt.
I certainly believe so. Although we should say this, shouldn't we? That real guilt, which relates to a real situation, if it is not communicated, if it is so strong that a person cannot communicate it, he keeps it secret within himself, there it becomes exaggerated it becomes distorted in its significance. He fantasizes at a very deep level. He thinks about it constantly. He can't get it out to reevaluate it in interchange with someone else. Then it becomes seriously
Yeah, I was
exaggerated.
thinking, what a horrible thing. That telephone rang at that one point. I thought he was just about to tell his wife, you know, what the real trouble was, and then the telephone rings and he shuts up.
At that point, he might have done so.
At that point, he might have done it.
And this would have been a very significant bridge, wouldn't it? Of course, one of the difficulties here, one of the barriers to his telling his wife, is in a sense the very thing which led him into the situation in the first place. That is his conception of himself as male provider. Sometimes we speak of this as a sex role conception. Now, this same feeling would be a barrier to his confessing to his wife, because in the real sense it would be a humiliation, it would be a blow to his manhood.
What you really mean, he began to hate his own guts because what he had hoped to do had so backfired, and
This
he
is
didn't
very
even
vividly
dare,
put.
he didn't dare tell the boss that he'd made this new invention?
He didn't dare tell the boss because of the authority structure, because the boss was the boss, and we always think very seriously about our future in the business under a situation of this kind.
So you're saying he really began to hate himself?
He really began to hate himself, and this was obvious in his hostility, but also it was obvious in his distorted perception of the reactions of other people, so that he thought the boss was spying. Did you notice this?
Yeah.
He read other people's reactions, their words, through the colored glasses of his own guilt.
Well, you mean to say then that the people, when they have a sense of guilt, are likely to have a picture of themselves that they kind of despise themselves as they are? This is a part of guilt?
This is a part of guilt. Sometimes we say that guilt anxiety triggers off shame anxiety, or a person is deeply humiliated. The question, have I transgressed, moves over into the question, am I an acceptable person?
Oh.
And this really is a more serious problem to deal with.
And that's the reason you shut yourself off from other people, because you're afraid you're not?
You're afraid you're not an acceptable person, and you're afraid everybody's going to discover it. And this leads to the isolation we sometimes associate with guilt. We see it in the church a great deal, don't we? I have learned when a young person suddenly begins to stay away from the youth group, if he has been attending the youth fellowship regularly and then stays away for 3 or 4 Sunday evenings, I have learned to go immediately to visit that young person and just talk and chat a little while, because the first thing we tend to do is to pull away from the community, especially the value-related community or the church itself. At the time when we most need the church, we're afraid to go. We sit there supposing that everyone knows our secret, and a chance word will be said, or someone will fail to say good morning. How often I have seen this in counseling. I remember very definitely a person who came a few weeks and then stopped coming to our church and felt that it was a very unfriendly church. Noticed every time when a person would say good morning to others and not say good morning to her. She projected, or she read this unfriendliness really into it, although I imagine our people sometimes do fail at this point. But she read the church situation through her own guilt. The church members didn't know anything about the guilt-producing situation.
In your counseling with particularly the young folks that you mentioned staying away from their meetings and their organizations and groups, and particularly, keep in mind please, particularly the young people, did you find any pattern of reason for their staying away? Or was there an individual reason for each case?
Yes, this is another area that I have worked in a very great deal, counseling with young people about their concerns with sex. A young person is likely to be anxious at 2 points. One, he has trouble with hostility. He's struggling for independence. He wants to make his own decisions, and he's getting tired of everybody else making up his mind for him. So this creates a great deal of hostility, but he can't vent this, so he has trouble handling it. He really has to rethink himself. In a real sense, he has to put himself back together as God sees him.
This business then of putting himself together and finding a self that he's no longer afraid if somebody sees it, he'll be rejected is very important for an adolescent.
This is very important for an adolescent.
Well, now, you used the word to see himself as God sees him. What do you mean by that?
To admit to himself what Carl Jung calls the shadow side of his existence. Dr. Jung feels that a person never really is whole until he can admit the side of himself which he doesn't show to his friends, even to his closest friends.
Something he probably doesn't like too much about himself?
Something he doesn't like too much about himself, which, where the adolescent is concerned with his sexual interests, this is a very natural and normal thing, but no one's telling him it is. No one's speaking with him about it because we're anxious about it ourselves. But God sees him, and here is one place where the Christian faith ties very directly into this.
Well, let me press you real hard on that one for the moment. Here this fellow gets so he has to close the doors between himself and his wife. Wouldn't you say that until he's able to actually tell his wife what the trouble is, that just knowing that God knows about it isn't going to be of final help?
I believe that in this sense, his acceptance of himself as God sees him or before God most often will have to be mediated through some helpful person. Helpful perhaps isn't the word, because this suggests that a counselor gives advice or takes over decision-making. Perhaps we should say some compassionate person. The love of God here really has to be mediated through, very often, through compassionate persons. His wife was, by all intents and purposes, Edith was qualified to play this role, wasn't she? You could see this qualification in several ways. First, she sensed that things weren't right with him. She knew this, even when he wasn't admitting it. Then she was willing to listen. She was willing to support him at the same time, to give him confidence. But at the same time, she was not willing to pry. She said at the end, "We'll just have to trust you."
Well, I wondered about that, because doesn't that reinforce in him this picture that the American man has of himself, that he must be self-sufficient? She finally says to it, of some effect, "Well, we'll have to leave it all to you." Now, this is nice, but isn't this a very dangerous thing to say?
Well, I can see your point, and I think it is a real point. This picture of the American man who always has to be right is something we're definitely are dealing with here, isn't it? It's a false sexual conception, and I think the Christian church has to begin to help our people to develop a more adequate viewpoint.
Well, we should press a little bit that business about that the American man may have a false picture of what a man really must be, so self-sufficient, so able to solve problems all by himself, so able to get along and keep secrets to himself. Is this true of American men as you experienced them?
This is very much true. As the Linds put it in their study, which they called, of the little town they called Middletown, they said that the typical viewpoint of man and woman here could be summed up by the slogan of the Women's Club: "Men are God's trees, women are God's flowers." Well, sometimes a man doesn't feel like a tree. He feels like a shrub. A man ought to be able to shed a tear in secret. I think any man who is...
You said in secret again, interestingly.
In secret, but nevertheless in the company of an understanding person. There is no disgrace for a man to cry in the presence of his wife, for instance, she who is compassionate, who understands him. In a real sense, he's still a small boy. In a real sense, she's a mother to him.
By the same token, he should be able to seek forgiveness, should he not? As well as to shed a tear once in a while.
Yes, and if he can begin at least with the better understanding of manhood, if his conception of manhood will include forgiveness, if it will include admission of wrong, this will be at least the first step. And here I think is where we need to do a lot with our young people, to help them to understand that a real man has two sides to him, or many sides. Sometimes he doesn't stand as a tree.
This man should really have felt guilty, and he really was guilty, because he had been so engrossed in his own advancement and that he had ruined several people. So he really should feel guilty.
Well, let me say this. We have to meet him at the level of his guilt and begin here. We cannot simply say, now, you shouldn't feel guilty about this, because he does feel guilty. We have to begin there.
Well, but are you going to say perhaps he really is guilty, or he just feels guilty?
Well, I believe that he is guilty. Now,
unless you recognize this, you're not really dealing with the depth of the problem here.
If a person does not admit that there is real guilt, if Ralph doesn't admit that there is real guilt here, then he simply has to turn his back upon his personal sensitivity to the trust and the mutual interrelationships and the pattern of law and all the rest of this which makes up human society.
Man essentially is a moral creature, then. You can't ignore this and get away with it.
The studies which I have been engaged in over the past 2 years in writing a dissertation in the field of guilt and shame and evaluation have led me to the very firm conclusion that man is a moral creature. That is, that guilt in a real sense is what might be called a signal anxiety, or it's a signal that his personal being is not together as it should be, that it has lost coherence, that it is losing meaning. In a real sense, he's falling apart as a spiritual creature, or as a creature who is whole and entire. And the more I study in this field, the more I come to the conviction that morality is internal. That is, that a person isn't whole to the extent that he isn't moral.
Perhaps if Ralph couldn't or wouldn't admit this was guilt, maybe it wasn't guilt, maybe it was disappointment. My real question...
This discussion isn't finished until you have thought through to your satisfaction the questions that Mr. Emery, Dr. Snyder, and Dr. White have been considering. Perhaps you will want to continue to think and talk about the issues which Talkback is raising. Talkback is a public service program presented by this station and the churches of your community. It was produced in cooperation with the National Council of Churches as a contribution of the Methodist Television Ministry.